Welcome Patreon members and YouTube community and MMA fans and Bellator fans, because this is the Bellator segment of the week for Bellator's 253 card coming up tomorrow night. We got some pretty good opportunities to make some good money tomorrow. I was able to break it down in which ones are going to be the best picks for not just who's going to win, but which ones are the best ones to implement as just single straight bets. Also, which pieces would be the best for parlays. I do have different sorts of combinations for parlays, one being a super duper safe one, which was the one that I will always give for every single event. I've always said that there's going to be at least one parlay combination that I'm going to give you guys that's the most guaranteed, no chance of not cashing in parlay combo. And since I've started and I've given those guaranteed ones, we've never missed and it's never not cashed. And that's the one I tell them that if at the end of the day they, let's say if you gambled or invested 500, make sure that if your total bets for the night total up to $500 of your money, at least that safe parlay I gave you that I put a pin on it in my Patreon posts, that one is enough to get you back your 500 and then a little bit extra. So no matter what happens with the rest of your bets, as long as that one cashed, you'll still have a profitable week. But also I would recommend, being that that's a safe one, you do single bets as an insurance policy and a way to get extra profits on all the pieces in that parlay combination, as well as my other picks. So you should always have a very good profitable week, as long as I don't have my first off week, which we haven't had yet and we'll hope not to ever have, I would imagine, as long as I continue to do my research and due diligence and use my knowledge and skills sets that I come with you guys with, based off of not just fighting experience as a fan as well, and a avid better, somebody who's mastered the system of betting and using parlays and straight bets and prop bets to our advantage. Okay, back to the card now. We've got a 9 fights on this 253 Caldwell versus Mckee event coming up tomorrow night. All right, we'll start with the opener. It's Sullivan, Cauley versus Markland. Now, let me say this is one of those fights that there's not much tape on either one of these two guys, because the favorite on this fight, Sullivan Cauley, is coming in with a 0-0 record, no wins, no losses. But from my studies, the tape research, my research on him, all the different areas I can find information and tapes on him, he's going to be the much bigger, stronger, and skilled fighter. He'll have the wrestling advantage, which, as I've always told you guys a million times, other than boxing, wrestling is the key, second most important, if not first most important, depending on who's using it in MMA's today's age of MMA, the world of MMA. So the way I've seen him dominate, he does have a good amateur record, better than his opponent, who's 0-1 professional. So he also has no wins, but he has a loss where he was dominated by somebody who's a much smaller guy than he was in a smaller weight class. A 180 pounder was dominating and outpowering and controlling him. So imagine what Sullivan, who's going to be the bigger guy this time than him, not smaller, is going to do to him, especially with the way better pedigree in wrestling. And so Jason, if you look at his 0-1 professional record and his amateur record, he's actually even got more losses than wins in the amateur as well. He's been put away and finished and knocked out and submitted in most of his fights. He's only got one win against a guy who had more losses than wins in his entire career, including his amateur record. So I'm going to fade Markland, who really had made me laugh at the weigh-ins. He made a sign, like usually the guys who are fighting for the belt or they're undefeated, like the Cosmots, the guys who are future prospects that are going to be somebody who's going to be a threat to the champion, they do this thing like this with their hands. That means I'm coming for the belt. He made that set gesture. This guy hasn't even had his first victory in an organization that's not known to have the best fighters, and he's already talking about going for the belt. That made me laugh. So that just says where his mentality is. It's a joke, just like his record and his skill set, unfortunately. So my favorite pick of the day, one of my most confident parlay pieces, my most confident single bet picks for single betting is Sullivan Cauley for that. Now, I don't do this the way I'm giving you guys the bets and stuff for Bellator. I don't do this unless you're a patron for UFC, which is where we make our main bread and butter UFC cards. I only do this for my Patreon members. So hit the like. Before you guys forget, please show me some love by hitting the like, the subscribe if you haven't, and also join in the Patreon so we can get you guys to start making some killer profits on these cards, especially for this weekend. It would be one of our probably best weeks to ever come because I found ways just off single bets, prop bets, and tiny small 2-leg, 3-leg parlays to make more than triple your money back. All right. Now let's move on to the next fight. So we got Sullivan Cauley beating Jason Markland. We got Kevin Ferguson Jr., who is going against Kaheem Murray, another two guys who are not very skilled. But Kevin Ferguson Jr., for those who don't know, Kimbo Slice is the guy who brought Jorge Masvidal, Gamebred, the BMF champion in the UFC, who a lot of people are high on. His father, Kevin Ferguson Jr., they call him Baby Slice because he's Kimbo Slice's son. The late Kimbo Slice, rest in peace, died at 42 years young only at unexpected complications, was rushed to the hospital and didn't make it, unfortunately. Was famous for his YouTube videos where he was backyard brawling and fighting people, knocking people out on YouTube. He's the one that brought Jorge Masvidal into the spotlight and made him a sensation in the UFC along with a couple of other people. So he did also fight in the UFC himself, but now his son is a very similar type of a style fighter. He's a knockout guy, kind of, but he also does have better ground skills than his father possessed when he was a fighter. His father was not a very good grappler and submission or ground guy, but he's a little bit better than his father was. And he's going against a guy who's coming with a 3-3 record. So he doesn't have an impressive resume. All three of his fights that he's won were by knockout, but he's not the biggest, strongest, technical type of a striker. It was based off because of his low-level competition. Kevin Ferguson Jr., Baby Slice, is not chinny. He's going to be coming in the bigger, stronger guy, should be able to take his hits, so this should be an easy fight. Kevin Ferguson being Baby Slice, his nickname because of Kimbo Slice's his father. The Bellator wants to back him up. The money marketing machine for Bellator is going to try to keep giving him easy fights. So you can expect this to somewhat be an opportunity for him to showcase his knockout power and hopefully finish it inside the distance. All right, J.J. Wilson versus Sergio Bari. This should be a pretty good matchup. They're trying to give J.J. Wilson some better competition because the guys he's been walking through, cutting through like butter, like a sharp knife cutting through hot butter. He's been slicing through his opponents quickly. This guy, from the start to the finish, from the second the bell rings, he's going to be coming for the finish. He's going to try to submit you, take your head off, take you to the ground. He's got an excellent game plan strategy. He's excellent on the ground, and luckily for him, they've given him an opponent who actually likes to go to the ground in most of his fights. He's not a slouch on the ground, so he'll be happy to go and down there, and he'll fall right into the hands of where J.J. Wilson will be at his best. And so I could see this also finishing inside the distance. J.J. Wilson, who they call the Maori Kid, he's 6-0. 5 of his fights out of 6 of his wins, he is undefeated. 5 of his fights have come by finish. He's not the type to go to the scorecards. The only fight he ever did let go to the decision cards was it was a close back and forth battle, his last fight, and it was a split decision. So it was a guy who is a bigger, stronger guy than he is, and he only had 1 loss out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Out of like 13 fights, if you include his amateur record, the only guy who was able to beat him. So that shows that J.J. Wilson is not a one-trick pony. If he doesn't submit you, he can go against the best of them. The only loss that guy who he beat by decision was, and the only fight that he won by decision, not by submission or KO, which he does have also under his belt, was a guy who only had 1 loss on his record before losing, was by a loss to Emmanuel Sanchez, which we've seen how impressive he was avenging his loss and now advancing to go fight the Pitbull the beast, Pitbull in the next fight of the tournament. So we've seen how impressive Emmanuel Sanchez is. He's got a good submission game. He's all around good fighter, point fighter, and just explosive type of a fighter for Bellator. One of Bellator's best, as the only other guy besides J.J. Wilson that beat Taiwan Claxton. So I'm very high on. I would love to have seen J.J. Wilson in the UFC. I think he'd be a great contender in that division. Featherweight, and it's such an exciting division. I would love to see him against some of the top 3 or top 5 in that. So hopefully one day we get to see him in the UFC. He's real young. He's only 23 years old right now. Also from Auckland, New Zealand, like where the champ Israel Adesanya is from. So they've proven themselves to be tough, good fighters from coming out of that place. His opponent, Sergio Bari, is not a slouch, like I said, so he'll put up a fight. I could see this possibly, but because he does play into the hands of J.J. Wilson's type of a match up that he would be in his favor, I could also see this finishing pretty early. All right, next fight we've got, so that's my other pick, J.J. Wilson. My next pick, we got Jaleel Willis versus Mark Lemminger. Mark Lemminger, most probably won't know this. It doesn't say it anywhere in your researches. You'd have to have watched a lot of his fights to know this, but on his corner, somebody he trains with and is trained and managed by, I don't know if managed, but he's trained by James Cross, who's shown, he gave Hannibal Silva his first loss in the UFC recently, a month or so ago. He fought against undefeated UFC prospect Hannibal Silva, and he gave him his first loss. So James Cross is also somebody who looked impressive back in the days when he was in like the Tough House and stuff. He should be a benefit to this guy coming into this fight because he does train with him. So for that reason, them having good level of training and sparring partners, I would not recommend putting Jaleel Willis in a parlay, but I still do see Jaleel Willis being somebody who is going to have a slightly good reach advantage. He's going to be the better athlete in a sense. He has an impressive record, has 5 TKOs under his belt. I've seen him do stuff like some of the stuff I was like, he does. He's a well-rounded guy. He uses his kicks very well. He's got a good boxing stance. He's got good like straight punches down the middle. He's very powerful. I've seen him knock people down and knock people out with his punches. And he's also coming off like a 4 or 5 fight win streak with the momentum on his side, as opposed to his opponent who's coming off of a loss. The thing I noticed about his opponent, who did lose his last fight against a very game opponent, I have to mention, because they both only have 2 losses, but Jaleel has more wins. Mark Lemminger, whose only advantage here will probably be on the ground, did not look very well against Jason Witt, which was the first guy who beat Jason Witt was the first guy who beat Hemming. I'm sorry, I always mess up his name. Lemminger. So Lemminger's first loss was against Jason Witt. Jason Witt dominated him really badly on the ground. And on the ground, he showed that he's the guy that just beat Cole Williams, by the way. So he was in my parlays. He looked very impressive. If you remember, we made a lot of good money on him on his debut fight against Cole Williams, who looked terrible at the weigh-ins, if you guys remember. And I told you guys it'd be an early finish. And also, so he cashed in on the prop bet and that single bet, as well as parlays when Jason Witt beat Cole Williams. But he also beat Lemminger very impressively. He dominated him the entire time on the ground. He showed a lot of holes in the game of Mark Lemminger, which I did see him kind of improve on a bit. Like he has beat Jake Smith and Rocky Edwards, but he shows that when he's got somebody who's stronger and more capable of defending against, like he also did lose recently against Yaroslav Amosov, the guy who we bet on and made a killing off of to go against the undefeated Jorgen Storley recently. I told you guys he was going to give Jorgen Storley his first loss, and you can put a lot of money on that fight. That same guy did beat him as well. He's coming off of a doctor stoppage TKO loss in the first round. So Mark Lemminger is not going to have the momentum on his side. I do edge this fight to go to the realist. His nickname, the realist, Jaleel Willis. He did look good in the weigh-ins. He does have some jiu-jitsu, some judo skills as well. He's a good judo practitioner. He'll be able to keep this wherever he wants it, and has shown good IQ, good power, have the reach advantage. So I don't recommend very many parlay pieces with him in it, but I do want to say he'd be a good straight single bet piece. Jaleel Willis to edge it out in a close competitive fight versus Mark Lemminger. It's going to be a good fight to watch. I recommend for any of you fight fans. All right, next fight in line, we got Jeremy Kennedy, 15-2 versus Matt Bessette, 24-9. This is another fight that I expect to go over 2.5 rounds because they are both very durable. They're both very competitive. They let the dog out every time they're in there, and they have a lot of heart. So I don't see anybody getting put away quickly here. I do give the slight edge advantage to Jeremy Kennedy, who his first and only loss before his second and only loss actually was against the champ. He's fought the better competition. His first loss was against Alexander Volkov. You guys know he's the current champion who just beat 2 times in a row Max Holloway. He defeated Max Holloway, the former champion, and somebody who is in the rankings for being top 5, top 10 of the greatest of all time. And so Volkov could beat him. It's not a shame that Jeremy Kennedy got his first loss to Volkov. So that's not something that he shouldn't be proud about. At least he got to share the ring with somebody who's a current champion in the UFC. And that's an impressive thing to have on your resume. His second loss was against another pretty game opponent, very good opponent. Second and only loss, he actually avenged it. It was against somebody who has a record of 34 when he beat Jeremy Kennedy. The guy he fought against had a record of 34 and 1 loss only. So he actually did avenge that loss, and a rematch when they fought again, he was able to give Luis Rafael Laurentino, he's from Brazil, his second loss only out of 36 fights. So he did avenge it. So the only loss he still has on his record is against the current champ of UFC's division that he was fighting in. So right, and lightweight division, featherweight, I'm sorry, whatever. I always forget which division he was in when he was fighting in the against Volkanov. Let me see. It doesn't matter. Anyways, back to the next fight here. We're at now, so we've got Jeremy Kennedy beating Matt Bessette, probably over by decision, edging it out. It should be also a competitive fight. We've got now coming up Keith Lee, not to be confused with Kevin Lee in the UFC, but Keith Lee, 7-3 record versus Raufeon Stots. Another similar situation. This guy's got an impressive record, 14-1. His only loss is against the undefeated Devil himself. That's a current very high, people are very high on, a big prospect in the UFC, Merab Devalash. I never could say this guy's name right, but he's not undefeated, but he's on like a 5 or 6 fight winning streak. Who's going to be matched up now with Raoni Barcelos, which is going to be an exciting fight coming up in the UFC December 5th card for ESPN 19. Merab will be going against Raoni Barcelos, which I'll be talking about in the next few days to come. But he's the machine. The Merab Devalash is the only guy who's given this guy fighting tomorrow in tomorrow's Bellator card, Raufeon Stots, his only loss. But after that loss, he's looked very impressive. He got a submission win, then a TKO win, and then unanimous decision wins. And then his most recent fight, he gave Cadwell his first and only loss by submission rear naked choke in the 3rd round. So that tells you a lot that this guy, even in the 3rd round, he's got good cardio. He doesn't gas out. After winning fights unanimously, decisively, he still keeps some cardio, some gas left in the tank. In the 3rd round, he was a threat and gave Cadwell his first and only loss in his career and Bellator. So very good guy. You can probably, he's going to be the stronger more skilled athlete in the fight versus Keith Lee. So that 14-1 record shows that he's got the better experience as well, fought the better level of competition. So my money is going to be on the Super. They call him Raufeon Stots. Probably a very good parlay piece as well. All right, moving on to the next fight now. We've got Bobby Lee versus Joey Davis, who's 7. Bobby Lee coming on 12-4. Seems to have made some improvements. If you looked at his last fight, he did look a lot better than sometimes in his other fights. He hasn't shown to be very skilled or a good of an athlete, but he did show some improvements in his last fight in Cage Fury against Michael Hill, unanimously beating him and showing good. He had good takedown defense and stuff, and also getting a submission arm triangle choke victory in the first round against Zach Shaw before that fight. But it's still not gonna be enough, I don't think, to be able to beat somebody in the level of Black Ice, they call him, Joey Davis, who's 7-0, 5 TKOs, 2 unanimous decisions under his belt. So he has never had a fight that he was in any trouble in, because let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All 5 of his TKO victories came in the first round. So some of them even inside. One of them was 30 seconds, 39 seconds. The other one was 59 seconds. So very impressive guy. Good power, good accuracy, very technical. And Bobby Lee, he just doesn't have the heart that I'd like to see in an underdog. If I'm ever going to put money on an underdog, it wouldn't be someone like him, because he's been put in situations where he's tapped out before the submission was even fully on. So before the chokes or stuff was actually properly being used and engaged, he quickly tapped out just to avoid being put to sleep and stuff. So that's not the kind of, that says everything I need to know about the guy, you know. So I got my money on Joey Davis, the Black Ice, another good parlay piece, I would imagine. But I do have, again, some very sophisticated, I put a lot of it's very systematically developed logic behind it. I got 2 excellent parlays, one being bulletproof, guaranteed to cash, and then I got some good single bets depending on specific things that I take into consideration. I will tell my patrons who to put the more money on, as opposed to just putting a smaller amount on their other ones, because I can tell who's the percentage-wise more likely to not be battling through adversity or not have the bad, risky matchups that could put them in danger by the underdog. So I take all that into consideration, and I make the determination on who to put most of your money on in the correct order. My patrons will know who the more confident picks of mine will be for tomorrow night's events, in case you guys do decide to want to bet on it. But I always still recommend to not put more than a small, like 10% of your betting pot on these cards, because they're lower level, unproven, inconsistent people who couldn't make it to the UFC type of fighters. So we put more of our money on the proven, better fighting, consistent guys that are in the UFC, which we have the privilege and abilities to make money on every single Saturday. Thank goodness to UFC being available to us to bet on once a week, every single week. No need for us to get greedy and put too much on these other cards. Okay, moving on the line now. We got our next fight is Benson. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Benson Henderson and Jason Jackson. I'm going to go with Benson Henderson, who was surprisingly the underdog here. Benson is a grappling champion, the guy who's UFC caliber. He's been in the UFC and done more impressive in the UFC. In my opinion, he was better in the UFC than he was in the Bellator, because they've matched him with only the best of the best. His only losses in the last, let's see, I would say several years have come to the guy who just got signed to UFC, because he's obviously UFC caliber, Michael Chandler, who's defeated him. Patrick Fierria, who's the Pitbull. Nobody can beat the Pitbull. He's one of the greatest of all time to ever live. And you've seen how quickly he disposed of his opponent, Cavallo, in the last Bellator event that we made some good money on. He was the main event and finished his opponent in the first round. Nobody's beat him in the last 10 years. almost only one guy, which was the guy who Emmanuel Sanchez fought against. So besides that guy and one other guy, and the rest of his fights were in the UFC when he was losing against pretty good level opponents. I don't think because he's got excellent cardio, he's got excellent grappling, he does jiu-jitsu, he does every type of style of combat this guy's engaged in, been a part, he does judo, he does everything. So he's got heart too. He's the type in the third round, even if he's winning 3 rounds to 0, he's still gonna fight like if he was down 3 rounds. So that's a guy who I would like to put money on as an underdog, and he's going against a guy who's not the highest level. Jason Jackson, 12-4 record, Jamaican, 30 years old. He's the type that, like, against medium level competition, low level competition, looks like a stud, but when you put him against the guys who are higher level, he does not do well. He's never shown to be impressive on that level. He lost the split decision fight against Ed Ruth 2 or 3 fights ago, and Ed Ruth has lost against like Neiman Gracie, Yaroslav Amoslav, and most recently to Taylor Johnson, who's got only a 6-2 record, and just lost to Johnny Eblin and Andre Muniz, which is a killer actually, so I can't blame him for that, but still. I don't think if you're going to give me plus money on Benson and Henderson to go against someone like this, I don't think it's a bad idea to put a little bit of money on Benson as a single bet, not a parlay piece, obviously. So because Benson's getting up there in age and just hasn't been looking as good as he used to. All right, guys, you got in. I'll throw in some freebies. I don't usually do this. This is usually just for my patrons, but I'll give you some freebies if you want to sprinkle some single bet money on it. On the Jaleel Willis, I see this because I said him and his opponent are very close in skills and grittiness. So the Jaleel Willis fight, I would say, could probably go over 1.5 rounds. The Baby Slice fight, I can see because he's supposed to live up to the reputation of his father, who was a knockout artist, and they're giving him somebody who is not as big and strong. So I could see Baby Slice finishing inside the distance. Joey Davis's fight, I can see going inside the distance as well. So I would go on the under rounds with Joey Davis, who's 7-0, very impressive. Most of his fights by knockout early on, against Bobby Lee, who's not shown the best and biggest heart in his fights. I could see that going under. I would probably go on the over for Benson Henderson, who does get most of his wins by decision. So I'll go with the over on that one, and under on the Sullivan, the opener for the fight night. It'll be Sullivan Cauley versus Jason Markland. Markland's been finished in almost, I think, every one of his fights that he's lost. Let's see, 1, 2, yeah. Even in the amateur scene, the regional scenes, every loss of Jason Markland's has been by finish early on too, first round. So they put him away pretty quickly, and those are against guys who are not even as big and skilled as Sullivan. So I definitely would say that this could even possibly be a prop bet that would be parlayable. Sullivan making his debut, he's going to try to make a name for himself and make some headlines and make this a memorable win for him against a guy who's should be very quickly and easily able to be taken out. So that's a good prop bet on the under for Sullivan Cauley. And I think that's it. Maybe for the main event, because it's a very competitive fight. These guys are both excellent, and I don't agree with the lines, although I do see the undefeated 16-0 AJ Mckee getting the win. I just don't think he'll be able to put away someone who has shown as much skills and toughness as Darrion Caldwell, who's got a pretty good record himself. Who in weigh-ins and face-offs weigh-ins looked very confident and in good shape, but so did AJ Mckee. AJ Mckee looked like he's having a very good training camp and weight cut. He mentioned that he didn't even have to go into the sauna room to lose weight, that this was one of his best weight cuts he's ever had. But I do see this one going on the over, so that may be something. But again, we have so many, and he also trains out of Alliance MMA, which is a good camp. But anyways, I see this one going on the over possibly, but not my most confident prop bet. Okay, so you guys got enough stuff you can make a lot of money on. Join the Patreon so we can give you the guaranteed bet slips that you'll need to go into the fight with. And hit the like, hit the subscribe, please, and leave any comments and questions leave any questions that you may have in the comments, and I'll be happy to get back to you guys. Thank you. Enjoy your night.